Marriage, in its essence, is not merely the union of two bodies, nor even of two lives. It is, above all, the intertwining of two unconscious worlds. What we see as companionship and affection is only the surface. Beneath it lies a confrontation between two souls, each carrying unhealed wounds, hidden fears, and long-forgotten shadows. To enter marriage is to invite another into the deepest chambers of the psyche, and not every person is prepared for such an encounter. The illusion of marriage is that love alone is enough to sustain it, but love without self-acknowledgement becomes fragile. Two people may stand together under the same roof, yet remain strangers to one another, because they are strangers to themselves. To be bound in marriage without first confronting one's own darkness is to project it upon the other, demanding that they heal what was never theirs to carry. Marriage is not for everyone, because not every individual is ready to sacrifice the comforts of ego. It requires the death of selfish illusions, the recognition of one's limitations, and the willingness to embrace the other, not as a possession, but as a mirror. Only those who are brave enough to face their own inner chaos can walk this path with honesty. For some, solitude is the truer road. Not out of fear, but out of necessity. For in solitude, one may come to understand oneself without the distortion of constant reflection. To choose against marriage is not to choose against love. It is to acknowledge that love takes many forms, and not all of them demand permanence in the worldly sense. Thus, marriage is not for everyone. It is not a universal destiny, but a task for those who are willing to wrestle with their own souls in the presence of another. And it is better to walk alone with truth than together with illusion. Marriage has always been seen as the highest form of human companionship, a sacred union in which two individuals devote themselves to one another. Yet, when examined more deeply, marriage reveals itself to be something far more complex than the celebration of affection or the establishment of family. It is a psychological crucible, a mirror that reflects not only the beauty of our affections, but also the unresolved elements of our inner life. Many step into it believing they are simply choosing a partner, but in reality, they are choosing to encounter their own unconscious through another. The partner is not merely a companion in daily affairs, but becomes the vessel through which forgotten shadows, hidden desires, and unhealed wounds emerge. This is why marriage cannot be reduced to the external trappings of rituals, promises, or social arrangements. Beneath these forms lies a confrontation with the depths of the psyche, a confrontation that not all are prepared to face. The unconscious is not silent in marriage. It speaks in the small frictions, in the irritations over trivial matters, in the sudden inexplicable distance that can appear between two people who once professed eternal closeness. What is happening in these moments is not a lack of love, but the surfacing of inner material that has long been repressed. We imagine marriage as a place of safety and harmony, yet it is also a place of revelation, where the masks we wear are gradually stripped away. The partner becomes both mirror and challenger, reflecting back to us the qualities we would rather ignore. One discovers through the eyes of the beloved not only tenderness, but also the disturbing presence of one's own shadow. In this way, marriage becomes less about romantic satisfaction and more about psychological exposure. This truth often confuses those who see marriage purely as a sanctuary of affection. They enter expecting stability, only to find that instability arises from within themselves. They expect to find in the other an endless source of validation, but instead, they are confronted with their own inadequacies and unresolved conflicts. The person they thought would complete them becomes the one who exposes the very incompleteness they had hoped to hide. This paradox is not a failure of marriage, but its very function. It exists to draw out what lies beneath, to force into the open the deeper parts of our nature. In this way, marriage is not simply a romantic covenant, but a psychological ordeal. Love, in its youthful form, is blind to these dynamics. It projects ideals upon the beloved, imagining them as savior, healer, or perfect counterpart. Yet as time passes, the illusion fades and the reality of the other person asserts itself. What was once divine becomes ordinary. What was once effortless becomes strained. In that moment, the true nature of marriage reveals itself. It is not the maintenance of a fantasy, but the confrontation with reality. Both the reality of the other person and, more importantly, the reality of oneself. If one clings to the illusion, bitterness arises. If one accepts the reality, growth begins. The difference lies not in the partner, but in one's willingness to engage with the unconscious that marriage relentlessly mirrors. The unconscious does not present itself in abstract terms. It emerges in the patterns of argument, in the sudden outbursts of emotion, in the recurring disappointments that seem inexplicable. Each of these is a message, a signal from the depths of the psyche that something unresolved seeks recognition. Yet, instead of recognizing the inner source, many blame the outer partner. They accuse, withdraw, or despair, never realizing that the conflict is less about the other person and more about what the other person has awakened within them. Thus, marriage becomes the battleground of projection, where each blames the other for qualities they themselves refuse to face. The reason this happens so intensely within marriage is because it creates proximity, unlike any other human bond. To live under the same roof, to share daily life, to expose one's vulnerabilities and closeness, this strips away the protective barriers we use to hide from others and from ourselves. In friendships or casual relationships, distance remains. In marriage, distance collapses. The beloved sees us not as we wish to be seen, but as we are. In unguarded moments, in weakness, in anger, in failure. This intimacy is what makes marriage transformative, but also what makes it unbearable for those unwilling to encounter themselves. Consider the person who has never examined their fears, their insecurities, their unresolved childhood wounds. In solitude, they may be able to hide these truths. In marriage, those truths find a stage. A careless word from a partner can awaken ancient feelings of rejection. A minor disagreement can stir rage disproportionate to the situation, fueled by buried frustrations. Without awareness, these eruptions are attributed to the partner, rather than recognized as the surfacing of the unconscious. What one resists within oneself, one accuses in the other. This is why so many marriages collapse, not because of external circumstances, but because the individuals within them could not bear the mirror that was placed before them. It is also why some thrive within marriage, not because their partner is flawless, but because they accept the task of self-confrontation. They recognize that every irritation is a teacher, every disappointment a revelation, every conflict an opportunity to see more clearly the contours of their own psyche. They do not demand that the other carry the burden of perfection, but rather use the relationship as a path to deeper self-acknowledge. In this sense, marriage can become a sacred work, not of maintaining eternal bliss, but of enduring the fires of transformation. The joy that arises from such a union is not the naive joy of initial romance, but the deeper joy of two souls who have faced themselves and each other with honesty. Thus, marriage as a mirror of the unconscious is not a mere metaphor, but a living reality. It is the psychological stage where hidden material takes on flesh and voice, where the unseen becomes seen through the dynamics of daily life. To enter marriage without understanding this is to stumble blindly into a battlefield of projections. To enter with awareness is to accept that one will not only be joined to another, but also confronted with oneself in ways that solitude could never provide. It is an ordeal of truth, a dismantling of illusions, a continuous revelation of what lies beneath the surface of personality. Without self-acknowledge, marriage becomes a stage upon which unconscious dramas are endlessly performed. When a person has not yet looked inward, they carry into the relationship a host of hidden conflicts, insecurities, and unmet needs. These do not vanish in the warmth of love. Rather, they intensify. The closeness of marriage acts like a magnifying glass, drawing these inner fractures into the light of daily life. What could have been recognized as one's own responsibility instead gets projected outward, placed upon the shoulders of the partner. Thus, the beloved becomes both the scapegoat and the screen for unresolved inner battles. The human mind, when unaware of its depths, has a powerful tendency to attribute its own darkness to others. This is not done consciously but instinctively, as if the psyche seeks relief from the burden of facing itself. In marriage, the person closest to us becomes the most convenient target for these projections. A partner's innocent remark may be interpreted as criticism, their absence as rejection, their independence as abandonment. What is actually surfacing are old wounds often rooted in early experiences of love, fear, or neglect. Without self-acknowledge, these wounds are misunderstood, and the partner is blamed for causing what they merely revealed. Love begins with an ideal. We see the other as everything we have longed for, a figure who embodies perfection, who seems to complete us. This stage is intoxicating, but it is also a projection. We are not seeing the other as they truly are. We are seeing them through the lens of our unconscious desires. The partner becomes an image of our longing, a reflection of what we wish existed within ourselves. Inevitably, the reality of the other emerges and the projection fades. What was once divine becomes human. What was once flawless reveals imperfection. For those without self-acknowledge, this disillusionment feels like betrayal. They believe the other has changed, when in truth it is their own projection that has dissolved. The danger lies in refusing to recognize this process. Instead of understanding that the disappointment is a natural unveiling of reality, the unconscious person clings to the illusion and demands that the partner continue to fulfill it. They expect eternal validation, endless affirmation, and perfect understanding, none of which is possible from another human being. The partner is forced to carry a role they never agreed to, a role born of the other's unexamined psyche. Resentment grows not because of who the partner is, but because of the impossible burden placed upon them. Arguments within such marriages often follow predictable patterns. The same disputes repeat themselves, often over trivial matters. But the triviality is deceptive, for beneath the surface lies a deeper symbolic meaning. A quarrel over household duties may conceal an unconscious struggle for control. A disagreement about time spent together may mask a fear of abandonment rooted in childhood. When the true source remains unacknowledged, the arguments never resolve. They circle endlessly because the external conflict is only a reflection of the inner one. Self-acknowledge is the key that reveals this pattern, allowing one to see that the real conflict lies not between partners, but within one's self. The unconscious has a way of forcing itself into awareness, especially in the intimacy of marriage. Yet without the courage to look inward, the cycle of blame becomes endless. One partner accuses the other of being too distant, too demanding, too indifferent, too controlling, never realizing that these accusations are often reflections of their own inner contradictions. In this way, marriage becomes a hall of mirrors, where each partner sees in the other what they refuse to see in themselves. The relationship becomes a battlefield not because of external incompatibility, but because the unconscious has been left unexamined. Self-acknowledge transforms this dynamic. The person who knows their own wounds, fears, and desires does not so easily fall into the trap of projection. They recognize when irritation is stirred by something deeper within, when disappointment is less about the other and more about their own unmet expectations. Such awareness does not eliminate conflict, but it changes its nature. Instead of endless blame, there arises the possibility of dialogue, of recognizing the unconscious roots of behavior. The partner is no longer seen as the enemy, but as the mirror through which self-discovery can take place. In the absence of self-acknowledge, love becomes suffocating. It demands too much, not because love itself is flawed, but because it is burdened with expectations it cannot fulfill. One demands of the partner unconditional attention, constant reassurance, absolute understanding. Yet these are not the duties of another person. They are the unmet needs of the self, seeking to be healed through another. When these demands are unmet, bitterness grows and the relationship collapses under the weight of unspoken psychological burdens. The tragedy of this is that many marriages end not because of true incompatibility, but because the individuals within them have not taken responsibility for their inner life. They confuse their projections with reality, believing their partner to be the cause of pain that actually originates within. Without the willingness to confront themselves, they run from one relationship to another, carrying the same unresolved patterns into each new union. The faces change, but the conflicts remain, for the true source lies within and has yet to be acknowledged. Marriage, therefore, is not simply about choosing the right partner, but about preparing oneself inwardly. A person who knows their shadow, who has confronted their fears and recognized their own patterns, enters marriage with a different perspective. They do not expect perfection, nor do they demand salvation. They approach the union with humility, aware that love is not the solution to every inner wound, but the context in which those wounds may appear. They accept that marriage will expose their unconscious, and instead of resenting it, they use it as an opportunity for growth. Without self-acknowledge, this opportunity is wasted. The unconscious continues its work regardless, surfacing in conflicts and disappointments, but instead of being recognized, it is resisted. The marriage becomes a prison of illusions, each partner accusing the other, neither willing to turn inward. What could have been a path of transformation becomes a cycle of resentment, all because the first and most essential task, self-acknowledge, was neglected. Solitude is often misunderstood as emptiness, as though the absence of a partner necessarily implies the absence of meaning. Yet solitude, when embraced with awareness, becomes one of the most fertile grounds for self-realization. To walk alone does not mean to reject love or companionship. It means to honor the necessity of inner growth before it can be authentically shared with another. Many enter marriage out of fear of being alone, believing that companionship will protect them from emptiness. But when a person has not yet faced themselves, the relationship only magnifies their loneliness. The silence within cannot be filled by another voice. It must first be encountered and understood in solitude. To live alone is to stand face to face with one's own being, without distraction, without the constant reflection of another. It is in solitude that one discovers whether one's thoughts are bearable, whether one's own company is nourishing or unbearable. For many, this discovery is frightening. They seek escape in relationships, in constant activity, in noise, in external affirmation. Yet what is fled from always returns, and if solitude has not been faced, its unacknowledged presence will haunt the marriage itself. The person who fears being alone inevitably clings to their partner, not out of love, but out of dependency, demanding that the other fill the void they themselves refuse to confront. This dependency corrodes love, transforming it from a free offering of the heart into a desperate attempt to silence inner emptiness. The strength to remain in solitude allows one to approach marriage without this desperation. When one knows how to live with oneself, one does not place impossible demands upon the other. One can love freely without the hidden agenda of using the partner as a shield against loneliness. This freedom is essential, for only when love is freely given without the weight of unconscious expectations can it grow in authenticity. Solitude teaches this freedom by forcing the individual to confront their own needs, their own fears, and their own hidden depths. Marriage is often regarded as the default path of human life, as if everyone is destined to find completion in union with another, but this assumption disregards the profound truth that not all souls are called to the same journey. For some, the deeper calling is inward, not outward. Their task is not to build a shared life with another, but to descend into the depths of their own psyche, to uncover truths that solitude alone can reveal. This is not a rejection of love, but a recognition that love takes many forms, sometimes expressed through union, other times expressed through the profound intimacy of self-discovery. To impose marriage as a universal expectation is to deny the individuality of the soul's path. Solitude, when chosen with awareness, becomes a discipline. It is not isolation for the sake of withdrawal, but a conscious turning inward. In this silence, the individual encounters their shadow, their hidden desires, their deepest fears. These encounters are often unsettling, for without the distractions of companionship, one can no longer hide behind the presence of another. Yet it is precisely this confrontation that makes solitude transformative. A person who has passed through solitude emerges stronger, more whole, and less dependent on external validation. They carry into the world a presence that is not desperate for recognition, but grounded in inner truth. In contrast, those who avoid solitude often carry into marriage a hunger that cannot be satisfied. They seek in their partner the stability they have not cultivated within themselves. They expect constant reassurance, constant attention, constant proof of love, because without it, they are confronted once again with their unacknowledged emptiness. This places unbearable pressure on the partner, who is asked not only to be a companion, but also to carry the burden of healing another's soul. Such marriages collapse, not because of a lack of love, but because of the unspoken demand that one person must solve what only solitude could resolve. The gift of solitude is clarity. In the stillness, illusions are stripped away. One begins to see what one truly desires, what values are essential, what patterns of thought and behavior repeat themselves. These insights cannot be discovered in the constant presence of another, for the noise of relationship often drowns out the subtle whispers of the soul. Solitude allows the inner voice to be heard, and in hearing it, one discovers whether marriage is truly one's path or whether a different destiny calls. Without this clarity, people enter marriage blindly, guided not by inner truth but by external expectations, only to find themselves restless and unfulfilled once inside. It is often believed that solitude is a state of lack, that to live without marriage is to live incompletely. Yet the reality is that solitude, when lived consciously, can be a state of profound fullness. It allows space for creativity, for spiritual growth, for the cultivation of an inner life that is rich and sustaining. Such a person does not live in loneliness, but in depth, drawing strength from sources beyond the immediate presence of another. They are capable of love not because they lack it, but because they have discovered its source within themselves. This kind of person, if they later choose to marry, brings into the union not neediness, but abundance. And if they choose to remain unmarried, their life is not diminished, but elevated by the richness of their solitude. The fear of solitude is rooted in the fear of the self. People fear being alone because they fear what they might discover in the silence. They fear the unresolved pain, the unhealed wounds, the unacknowledged longings. Yet to run from these fears is to remain a prisoner to them. Solitude, embraced consciously, is the path to liberation. By facing oneself without distraction, one comes to terms with what is hidden. The shadows lose their power, the fears lose their grip, and the individual becomes free to engage with others, not from desperation, but from choice. This is why solitude for some is not only necessary, but superior to marriage. It offers the possibility of self-realization without the constant distortion of projection. It provides the opportunity to grow in a way that is unencumbered by the demands of partnership. For some souls, this is the higher calling, the truer road. To walk it requires courage, for society often condemns those who choose solitude as incomplete or selfish. Yet the judgment of society is irrelevant compared to the authenticity of one's own path. What matters is not whether one conforms to expectation, but whether one follows the truth of one's inner necessity. To choose solitude with awareness is to honor the deepest demands of the psyche. It is to recognize that love and meaning can be found in many forms, not only in marriage. It is to affirm that the path of self-acknowledge is itself a form of union, a union with the hidden depths of one's own being. And in this union, a fullness is discovered that no external bond could ever provide,